I'm so excited today to talk to you about a set of tools for business writing that's going to help you improve your business writing skills. Now, the first thing, in order to help you understand business writing, is to differentiate it between creative and academic writing. This writing, business writing, is not creative. You don't have to wax prosaic. We don't even want you to. You don't have to be poetic. It's not like academic writing, where you are research-based, as in writing something for a scientific publication. We want, for your business writing, simply to help you relay information that is clear, specific, and direct. You want to help your business employees to move from point A to point Z in as little time and with the most efficiency possible, so that you can be action-oriented and help people get things done. So we're going to give you 8 tools that are going to help you construct clear, concise messages so that you communicate with power and efficiency. Now, in order to do that, we're going to give you some rules and we're going to give you some guidelines. Rules are those things that if you break them, you're actually going to go to grammar jail, which means these are bona fide rules that are right or wrong. You want to understand what those rules are so that you don't break them. They're important. On the other hand, you have guidelines. These are style guidelines. These are things that aren't necessarily rules that will send you to jail, to grammar jail, but these are guidelines that, when implemented at the right time and place in business writing, are going to help you construct clearer, more effective messages. So now I'm going to illustrate for you one of those grammar rules that, if you break it, actually changes the meaning of the sentence. Now, what I'm trying to say is that John owns a small business. He's a small business owner. But in actuality, the sentence as written, because I haven't correctly used my adjectives in the sentence, is saying that John is a little tiny business owner. And I'm not trying to say that he's a small business owner. I'm trying to say that he's an owner who does small business. So to fix this, I'm going to add in a hyphen. We'll talk more about this later, but one of our rules states that we have to use adjectives correctly. And in this case, in order to link these two adjectives together, I need a hyphen. So break that rule. You've actually broken a grammar rule and you've changed the meaning of the sentence. Now let me show you an example of something that's simply a guideline, where a grammar rule is not being broken, but if you violate the guideline, you weaken your sentence. One of our guidelines states that we want to use strong subjects that have a strong relationship with the action taking place in the sentence. This sentence is a weak example of that principle. It is important that we deliver the documents. Let's first do a word count, and then we're going to look at the subject-verb relationship. So this sentence has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words in it. Again, in business, remember, we want to get people from point A to point Z as efficiently and quickly as possible. So reducing word count typically is something that we want to do. I'm going to now circle the subject of the sentence and underline the verb. It is. Well, it is a wimpy subject. It's weak, and it's not really an actor of the action doing something. It's simply a weak pronoun. So I'm going to eliminate this and restructure my sentence. Now I've rewritten the sentence with a strong subject, and it says, we must deliver the documents. Clear, direct language. And in fact, instead of using 8 words, I'm only using 5. I'm delivering my meaning faster and with better clarity, because now I've indicated who is actually doing the action. That's a guideline. It is important to deliver the documents. Doesn't break a grammar rule. You won't go to grammar jail, but you are being inefficient. So in the next set of series of videos, we're going to give you both rules and guidelines that are going to help you write clear, strong, powerful business writing.
our previous video, we provided an overview of the TOEIC writing test, discussing the overall purpose of the test and looking at the general test design. We also analyzed the first writing task, write a sentence based on a picture, and discussed the importance of grammatical accuracy and relevance in successfully completing this section. Now, once again, in discussing the actual design of the test, again, the test itself comprises 8 questions, and the test will probably last around about an hour. Now, on the section of the test we're looking at today, there are 2 questions in which you have to respond to a particular written request. Now, looking at the evaluation criteria, the first thing you will notice is it does sort of contain some of the elements of the ideas before it, but as we discussed in the first video, they're most likely going to have specific set of criteria that each particular question is going to be looking for. So on this part of the test, looking a little more carefully at the scoring guide, first off you'll notice that the maximum score is a 4, not a 3. And then we're also looking at the idea that we need to provide some sort of organizational logic. This is going to be a key word that we're going to look at a little bit more in our video today. Also thinking about appropriate connecting words, thinking about how the idea needs to fit together. Another key idea we're going to be looking at is thinking about the register of the response and that it's appropriate for the intended audience. So these are going to be some things we're going to kind of look at a little bit in today's video. However, you will notice that grammar will not play as much of a part as it does in the first task, in which grammatical accuracy was essential. In this task, it is going to be more about how to express ourselves, and especially conveying the information that we're looking for in the prompt. So once again, we are taking our sample questions from the TOEIC Speaking and Writing Sample. You can find the link at the bottom of this video. So in looking at the example, we're going to go ahead and kind of jump in and talk about the tasks themselves. Now, again, we will kind of analyze the requirements, but let's just go ahead and look at the directions. In this part of the test, you will show how well you can write a response to an email. Your response will be scored on the following 3 things: the quality and variety of your sentences, use of vocabulary, and finally organization. And you will have 10 minutes to read and answer each email. Now, in looking at the sample that we're given, this is what it will look like on the screen. You will be given the directions at the top, and actually a time to kind of read through the information here. And of course, this is all part of the total time you're given. So we will analyze the task a little more carefully here. The idea here is thinking about that the email will have a from line, a to line, a subject line, and of course when it was sent. At the bottom of the screen you will see that the directions of the task are to respond and type in the space just like you were typing an actual email. And notice it does ask that we make at least 2 requests for information. So as we move along, we'll analyze the task a little more carefully, but this is kind of a general overview. So again, what do we notice? Well, we have 10 minutes to answer 2 email tasks, so not a lot of time. The prompt itself is essential to providing the appropriate answer, so obviously we can't answer it until we know what we're responding to. And we see that the response must be in the format of an email. Now this brings us to our first tip, and really this is something we discussed in the speaking section. The key here is to think about that we have to imagine we are a participant. So, for example, if you're to answer as an employee or representative of a company, you have to imagine that you work for that particular company. So, in our particular prompt here, just who are we in this activity? Well, let's take a look. So, since this is an email, where would we find who we're supposed to be? Well, generally we would find that in the to line. That's us. So in this case, we are a resident of this city called Dale City. So how is that going to be important here? Well, we are a resident who has just moved in. So in order for us to think about what's an appropriate response, we also have to think about the context. So that's going to be important. But part of the task will also be in identifying what the actual content of our email must be. So in looking at the prompt, we can think about how can we identify our specific task? Well, first off, looking at who it's from and looking at the actual content of the message, these are going to be our first clues. So if you notice, it's from this welcoming committee and talking about the things that oftentimes we might need to know when we move to a new city. Well, let's look a little more carefully now at the actual content. It says, welcome. We would like to be the first to welcome you to Dale City. We know that there are many things to do when you move, from finding your way around town to setting up your utilities. Please contact us if you need any help at all. So this is going to give us some ideas as to what to include in the content of our email. So now we think about, okay, we know the basic task. What is the appropriate organization we need to follow? What kind of language should we use? These things are going to be essential in knowing how to respond to this email. So this brings us to our next discussion as to the importance of email etiquette. Now you might recall in the speaking section we talked about the importance of customer service. Well, when it comes to writing emails, there also is a certain set of rules or basic ideas we need to follow. Now, you probably noticed by now that emails are composed in a very similar way to writing a letter, though they're probably not as formal. There are specific things we need to include and consider that are basically considered expected for an email response. Of course, we must remember as we cover this topic that we're writing a business or formal email, not necessarily one we would send to a friend or family. So even though this is not as formal as a letter, it is going to be a little bit more formal than if we're sending it just to our friend. Now, in general, there are 4 things we need to make sure we include when following this idea of email etiquette. First off, appropriate organization. That's always key. Using appropriate language, vocabulary, of course, and that's going to be something we see throughout the TOEIC writing section. And we want to make sure that we use somewhat polite and, of course, semi-formal language. Again, it doesn't have to be as formal as a letter, but certainly more formal than if you were writing to your family. And, of course, using the right words. We want to make sure we know the right words that we need to use in this case. Using appropriate sentence structure, so making sure that the sentences themselves are complete, but also that they're interesting and they're of different lengths too. So, first off, let's think in general about the format of an email. Well, first you have a greeting or salutation, which is usually the first thing we put in an email, and of course we see that in a letter as well. Now, we think about salutations and emails are, again, a little more informal than letters. So, for example, we might want to say, hello, Mr. or dear Ms. Or even we could just say Mr. or Ms. We don't even need dear in this case, because emails are generally less formal. Now, in terms of the body of the email, we have to think about first, what's the purpose? Well, generally in the body, we address whatever the main issue or problem is. The language that we use is probably, again, more formal than an email to our friends, but not as formal as a letter. And we want to use an idea of thinking about politeness markers, polite language. We also want to think about that in a general organization of an email, we probably need to acknowledge the task. That's probably one of the first things we need to do. We need to think about addressing, explaining, or elaborating on a particular problem or situation. And then, of course, we need to figure out an appropriate close to how to finish the response. And, of course, closings in emails or letters are pretty much the same as you see in letters, using words such as thanks, best wishes, good luck, or even regards. Those are things we often see in emails. Now, of course, as we mentioned before, politeness markers, using those would be very important. And I think that's going to be important because it helps us to show the test that we can recognize that a request is being made. So let's look at some examples of some politeness language. Again, in greetings, we think about the word dear. That's usually a word that we use that shows some form of politeness. In the body, when we use acknowledging language, we might say something like, thanks for the email, or I appreciate your email. With requesting language, we say things such as, would you be able, or could I ask a favor? I would be so grateful if. If we're offering information, for example, or offering to help, we might say, I would be happy to. If we're finishing the particular email, we might use words such as "thanks again for your time," or "I'm looking forward to your response." In closing the email, again, words such as "best wishes" or maybe even "regards." Can you think of some other examples? Surely you've written emails before. What are some other things you can think of that you might want to include? Of course, we also have to be able to recognize the appropriate vocabulary. That's going to be a big part of understanding how to respond to the prompt accurately. So, of course, context is going to be the best way to determine the right vocabulary to use. So, looking at the prompt, let's look at it again and think about which words or ideas will help us provide that context. So take a look again and see if we can identify which words or ideas would help us understand the appropriate vocabulary we need. Well, in looking a little more carefully, let's pull out our pen tool. I do see, for example, finding our way around town. So, for example, maybe trying to find certain places or locations that are important. For example, maybe setting up our cable. Notice it says at the end, setting up utilities. What are examples of utilities? Well, oftentimes we think of utilities as electricity, perhaps, or hooking up our water or telephone. Of course, many people today use cell phones, but let's imagine that telephone could be one of the possibilities. Maybe the internet, cable TV. These are some things that we might need to ask people about, or even recommendations of places to go. So these particular ideas probably help us a lot in thinking about what kinds of things do I need to put in the response, in my response. So notice the first thing we need to understand is that this particular email is also a welcome to us. So we need to kind of thank them. We need to acknowledge that this email was to greet us. I also need to recognize that I'm moving to this community, and I probably need help to do so. So as we said before, thinking about utilities, I probably need some help. As we said before, utilities are usually water, gas, electric, phone. And I also think about the fact that they said, please contact us. So really, that's really the purpose here. I need to contact them and thank them for the email. So now we're going to look at a sample email response. And you'll notice, as we're looking, let's see if we can identify how did we try to come up with the format of the email, what types of politeness expressions did we use, and examples of appropriate language that also show that we understand the task. So let's take a look at this example. Now first off, I'll give you a moment to read through it. We'll look at it together a little more in depth here in just a moment, but this is just a sample email I've put together. Now first off, you might remember that in the original task we had to come up with 2 requests. That is essential if we want to be able to get the highest score. We have to be able to follow the request of the prompt. So in our actual typing of the response, we need to include 2 requests. So first off, notice we do use our greeting and salutation. Hello. Now, of course, the email that we were responding to didn't include anybody's name. So we could say hello or hello Dale City Welcoming Committee, but a name wasn't actually provided. Notice next, in the first part, we acknowledge the request. Thanks so much for the email. I really appreciate the hospitality. I would like to ask a couple of questions about Dale City. So in a way, we're recognizing that they were offering to help, so we want to take them up on this offer. Again, the 2 requests, as we said, we have to address or explain or elaborate on a particular problem. Now here are the 2 I came up with. Of course, you could come up with something else. Do I need to pay city taxes directly, or will they be taken out of my escrow? When is the first payment due? Number 2, will I be able to turn on my utilities before I move in? Will you be able to help with us? Or should I contact the utility companies directly? So in this case, I've come up with 2 examples that you might want to consider when thinking about moving to a new town. These are certain things that people probably think about. Notice in the final part, we finish the email. Again, we thank them for their time. And notice I included an extra note about being excited about moving to the city. And then finally, I add a closing, and I even include my name, which I think is important here because obviously we don't write emails and not include our name. Now look at some of the examples in which we're using polite language. Thanks so much. I really appreciate the hospitality. I would like. Thanks again. Take care. Again, I think these are the things that the TOEIC happens to be looking for as well. We need to include some of these politeness ideas because the idea is we have to demonstrate that we know how to write an email, especially an email in this situation. So please make sure to remember to include these politeness ideas. Now let's talk about some appropriate language. Again, we mentioned the idea of hospitality. This is a pretty good word to use when someone is trying to show you how nice and friendly they can be when moving to a new city. City taxes, first payment, escrow. These are words that often show that we understand that these are things that people have to do when they move. Turning on utilities, contacting the utility companies directly. And thinking about that, the fact, of course, you're moving to Dale City, we probably need to mention that we're excited about moving there. These all seem fairly contextual and appropriate considering our situation. So some final thoughts about this task. Remember that you have about 5 minutes to do each one on the test. And I think this is certainly important as we go along to remind you that typing and expressing yourself fluently is going to be pretty important. And it's also extremely important to show that you know how to respond to the prompt by using the appropriate language and format. Now remember, even though an email is not as formal as a letter, you should still remember to use appropriate semi-formal ideas such as politeness markers. Use appropriate word choice, including vocabulary that indicates that you acknowledge the requirements of the prompt. Of course, you have to use complete sentences. Remember, this is a business email, not an email to friends. Now, throughout the video series, we've recommended several materials, but again, I still want to stress the importance of having a good textbook series, and I think the Grant True series is probably the best that's available. Again, there are lots of sample responses that you can look at to see just exactly what the test is looking for. And again, most of the tasks at this point in the video series, the speaking and writing, are pretty specific, so I would recommend the textbook series to help you continue practicing. And of course, we do offer a new TOEFL and TOEIC preparation website, and the link can be found at the bottom of this page. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time for video 3, Write a Personal Essay.